We're now entering the fourth week of the search for Nancy Savannah's mother. Time is running out, and the trail seems to be vanishing into thin air. Groups of volunteers are combing every inch of the neighborhood near her home. The sheriff insists tips are still pouring in while Liz Kotelik reports for us from Tucson this morning. Good morning, Liz. Hi, Hoda. Hopefully this fourth week will finally bring those answers we all so desperately need. Although the sheriff admits they still don't have a clear suspect in their sights. He says they're getting closer to pinpointing exactly what the kidnapper was wearing at the time of the attack. But he also acknowledged something unsettling. Processing the DNA samples found in the house has turned into a real forensic maze. Think about it for a second. What if the most dangerous weapon in this kidnapping wasn't a gun but a microphone? Because the night Nancy Guthrie vanished, with the camera's cutter pacemaker offline and blood on the porch, the world was waiting for one thing. We have DNA. Believe me, if we knew who it belonged to, we'd already be on him. But we're just analyzing what we have with the lab. That genetic material you're talking about, do you really think it belongs to the perpetrator? It just doesn't match anyone in the database. We have DNA, but the identity is a complete mystery, so we have no choice but to keep looking. Wow, that's a hugely important detail. It is no doubt about it. And was it found inside the property? Well, on the exact location of the sample, I'm not going to get into specifics for now. DNA is supposed to be the end of the road. Case closed, cuffs snapped on, headlines fading as justice is served. Instead, what we got was a press conference and 5 words from Sheriff Nanos that sound far too vague: challenges, mixtures, hope, and slow analysis. Another thing that stood out was that he mentioned hurdles with the genetic testing. Something we had no idea about. He says the lab in Florida they're using is having trouble because the DNA is mixed. Those were his words. And of course that contamination is causing significant delays in all the testing. Obviously that's not good news. We'll have to see how it plays out. At the end of the day, forensic science moves fast, but the clock doesn't stop ticking. That doesn't sound like a police report on a manhunt. It sounds like a lullaby to keep everyone calm. So let me ask you something. When a sheriff says the DNA is complicated instead of a disaster, who is he really trying to reassure, the public or the perpetrator? Because this is where the story gets murky. There are rumors that the sample was tiny, partial, and so weak it might not even be enough to enter the national database. But under the spotlight, the message was different. In front of the cameras, they sold progress. Behind the scenes, the reality tells a very different story. Did Sheriff Nanos sugarcoat the truth to avoid public panic? Or did he just hand the kidnapper the most valuable thing there is: time? Don't go anywhere, because this isn't just about genetics. It's about what happens when words carry more weight than evidence. We know this is one of the key issues the Pima County Sheriff's Department is laser-focused on in the Nancy Guthrie case. But how long can the process drag on when you have a questionable sample and you decide to go the genealogy route? The morning after that press conference, Pima County woke up in confusion. There was no rage, no panic, just a lot of questions. And confusion is pure poison in a case that should be transparent, because Nancy Guthrie didn't just go missing. She disappeared in a window of just 41 minutes between 1:42 and 2:23 in the morning, right when her camera went black. Fortunately, the sheriff sent the samples to a private lab that operates as a one-stop shop for the entire process. They're experts at extracting genetic material from evidence and then creating 2 completely different profiles. One to upload to CODIS, the system police have used for decades, and another much more detailed profile, which is the one you need for genealogy. Doing it there saves time, since they have the capacity to work on both profiles simultaneously, with no waiting. That way, not a second is lost if the national system doesn't return any hits. They can immediately jump to family tree tracing. Once they manage to put together that profile, which includes hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the entire genome, the real challenge begins. I've been told that in this particular case, at least one of the samples is a mixture of multiple different DNAs. That forces bioinformatics experts to separate the biological strands to make sure they're tracking only the suspect. When they finally pull it off, the information gets uploaded to the databases that still allow law enforcement to collaborate on genealogy. Unfortunately, even though more than 50 million people have done at-home DNA tests, access is being restricted. The 3 biggest companies in the market shut their doors to police. Now they have to rely on the 3 smaller databases: GED Match, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Justice. Her medical monitor suddenly lost connection. On the doorframe, just a barely visible smudge of blood. There were no reports of forced entry. and there's no official suspect. Just a meticulously measured statement, and a sheriff at the podium admitting that the DNA presented challenges. But there was one question nobody dared to ask that morning. What kind of challenges are we actually talking about? The kind you solve in a week, or the kind that end up filing cases away in a drawer forever? In the shadows, the rumors are already running faster than the official truth. A source with alleged ties to the forensic unit leaked to KGUN9 that the unknown DNA sample found in Nancy's house was low yield. There was no drama, no movie-style scenes. Just two cold words that at the end of the day mean the same thing. There's almost nothing there. And of course, if there's no material, there's nothing to compare. But Sheriff Nanos kept that detail to himself. He chose to lean on appearances. A measured, almost soothing tone. The kind you use when the plane starts shaking from turbulence. Because the last thing you want is for the passengers to bolt for the exits. Our lab is working diligently, he said. That place, DNA Labs International, hundreds of miles away, has in its hands one of the most high-profile cases in the entire history of Pima County. Why not send it to Quantico? What stopped the sheriff from immediately bringing in the FBI's genetic elite? The official answer was consistency. For critics, it was about control. And this is where the plot gets suffocating. Just 14 days before Nancy vanished, Nanos was already under scrutiny over certain budget moves within the department. A Reuters report talked about internal friction over forensic outsourcing contracts. Nothing illegal, just politics and tension, but timing is everything. And now that same lab tied to those contracts is handling the only key piece of biological evidence. The only lead that could point to the kidnapper. Coincidence? Maybe. But public trust isn't built on doubt. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter and well-known national journalist, went from holding it together to visibly falling apart in less than 10 days. At first, she talked about bringing her mother home. In her most recent message, the keyword shifted to recovery. That's not just a question of language, it's a psychological break. Recovery doesn't guarantee life. Recovery only promises closure. And while Savannah was putting a 7-figure reward on the table, the sheriff kept describing the DNA as a mixed sample. Mixed sounds like a challenge, something an expert could solve, like a puzzle waiting for a genius. But what if mixed just means contaminated by everyday life? Traces from family visitors, workers, pure noise, drowning out the signal. What if the only unknown thread, the one that really matters, barely had enough strength to survive the analysis? If that's true, saying we'd have to wait months or even a year wasn't a neutral comment. It was a warning. And someone out there was listening very carefully. Put yourself in the kidnapper's shoes. You watch the press conference. You hear difficulties. You hear months away. You hear hope. What you don't hear is we have you surrounded or genetic profile completed. You don't hear urgency. You hear room to breathe. And that extra air changes how a criminal behaves. It lets you move, get rid of evidence, close ranks, or even worse, feel safe. Now ask yourself an uncomfortable question. If the DNA were solid, sharp, and revealing, would Nanos have used such lukewarm words? Or would that moment at the podium have carried a completely different weight? In these high-stakes games, silence is strategy. But fake calm, that's a tell. And in Pima, that signal is deafening. Not because of what's being shouted, but because of everything that's being kept quiet. I'm here to tell you that it's been 24 days since they took my mom in the middle of the night right out of her bed. Every hour, every damn minute and second has been pure agony. Endless nights of fear, of anguish, of our hearts aching for her. And above all, missing her. We just want her back. We know there are millions of people out there praying. People of all faiths, and even those who don't believe in anything, are asking for her to come back. And we truly feel that energy. Please don't stop praying. We still have faith. We still believe a miracle can happen. We believe she can come home. What followed wasn't a media explosion but a slow burn. Sometimes the scandals that simmer on low heat are the worst. 3 days after Nanos's calm, something cracked in the shadows. A leaked internal memo suggested that the DNA sample didn't even meet the minimum requirements to be entered into the CODIS database. It's not that it's delayed. It's something worse. Listen to this new message from Savannah Guthrie. It's not that they're processing it or almost done. It's that it doesn't qualify. That changes the headline completely. Officially, of course, no one has confirmed that document exists. The lab stayed silent. The FBI mum. But on forums and local radio, anonymous rumors started catching fire all over the place. A forensic consultant who asked to remain anonymous laid a bitter truth on a TV producer. If that profile doesn't go into the national database, all you can do is pray for a miracle. A miracle? That's not science. That's pure desperation in a white coat. And here we come back to the uncomfortable part. Why insist so much on patience? Why float the idea that results could take months or even an entire year? Because when police leak their timelines like this, they're not just talking to the public, they're handing direct cues to the suspect. Meanwhile, public pressure was building in a totally different direction. Savannah Guthrie's announcement of the $1 million reward made the tip lines flat-out crash. The 8-8 crime. Anonymous organization reported a spike in anonymous tips, like nothing they'd ever seen. Some seemed credible, but most were pure chaos. One person called in claiming to have seen a dark pickup truck circling Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood days before she vanished without a trace. Another said that weeks earlier, a masked man had been knocking on several doors as if he were measuring the reach of the cameras. And that's when everything took a turn. ABC News dropped a bombshell. One of the surveillance images authorities had released wasn't from the night Nancy disappeared. It was from days earlier. Same house, same porch, same masked guy. 2 separate visits. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't something improvised. This was a rehearsal. Someone studied the property, measured the angles, learned the lighting, and probably mapped every blind spot, which makes the DNA evidence, if anything, that much more crucial. When there's premeditation, there's almost always preparation. Gloves, coverings, total control of the surroundings. So if any biological trace was left behind, it wasn't from a careless mistake. It was minimal. That's why when Sheriff Nanos kept emphasizing the mixed DNA, a lot of people wondered whether that term was technically true, but used to throw people off strategically. Mixed with what? With family, with paramedics, or with simple traces of contact already in the house? Because if 90% of what was collected belonged to Nancy herself, or to people who legitimately lived there, then the mystery isn't an abundance of evidence, it's the lack of it. And scarcity changes everything, absolutely everything. A retired detective spoke off the record to News Nation, and was blunt: if the DNA is scarce, you don't try to buy time. You create urgency. But urgency wasn't exactly the tone coming from the podium. It was calm, it was measured, it was hope, and hope can be a powerful tool. However, in an investigation, hope without clarity can turn into a smokescreen. By that point, Pima County wasn't just witnessing a kidnapping. They were watching language being manipulated. And sometimes words say a lot more than evidence ever could. Suddenly the mood shifted. Not outside but inside the department, because when the pressure climbs too high, something always ends up cracking. 2 senior Pima County police officials speaking on condition of anonymity. Of course, allegedly told CNN that the internal mood had shifted from confidence to plain damage control. Damage control of what? Not of the suspect, but of the official narrative of events. According to those rumors, the biggest fear within the department wasn't that the kidnapper would escape, but that the public would realize how fragile the forensic evidence really was. Stop for a second. If the DNA were ironclad, rock-solid evidence, there would be quiet confidence, focus, and absolute precision. But when you start seeing interview after interview promises to stay calm, and that constant emphasis on patience, that's no longer investigation. It's damage control. And institutional messaging only becomes necessary when momentum is being lost. Meanwhile, the FBI lab at Quantico kept a deafening silence. No triumphant updates, no confirmation of parallel testing, not a word about imminent breakthroughs. Just an unsettling stillness. That made one comment from CeCe Moore on News Nation feel almost like a bombshell. Without speaking directly about the case, she explained that partial DNA samples, especially very low-level mixtures, can sometimes yield results through advanced SNP profiles, but only if there's enough genetic material to work with from the start. If the unknown trace is too weak, she said calmly, you can extract data, but not an identity. Data, not identity. That phrase echoed across social media within hours. Because identity is everything that matters. And if science can't deliver it, where will it come from? From witnesses, from cameras, from a clumsy mistake or a last-minute confession. Suddenly, that $1 million reward no longer looked like a gesture of confidence. It looked like a strategy. Money breaks silences and tests loyalty. Money can shatter alliances. Richard Carmona, a former U.S. Surgeon General, went further during an interview with KGUN9. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't attack. He simply said this about high-profile investigations. Transparency has to be balanced with tactical discipline. You never want to project weakness by accident. Project weakness. That phrase hit deep. Because picture being the person responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. You're sitting there watching the news. You hear there are challenges that this could take months, that they have hope. You see debates about whether the samples even qualify for the databases. You watch experts arguing over partial profiles. You don't see panic or urgency. What you see is wiggle room. And that breathing space feeds the criminal's confidence. Now here's the real controversy. Was Sheriff Nanos trying to keep the peace in a chaotic case, or did his calm accidentally project vulnerability? Leadership in the middle of a crisis is always walking on a knife's edge. If you hold back too much, the public stops trusting you. But if you go overboard reassuring everyone, the suspect starts to feel comfortable. Pima County is right on that edge. The reward is over $1 million. Tips keep rolling in. And they're reviewing more cameras every day. But the DNA, that supposed silver bullet, is still suspended in uncertainty. And uncertainty is the oxygen that fuels every suspicion. The case is no longer simply about who took Nancy Guthrie. The question now is whether those carefully measured, coldly delivered words ended up tilting the chessboard. Was the sheriff shielding the investigation? Or did he unknowingly hand the perpetrator the time he needed to escape? In Pima County, there's a truth no one can ignore. The evidence may only be fragments, but what comes next, those consequences will be total. Our Nancy Lou out there in Tucson. We just heard that audio together for the first time, and the silence it leaves behind is heavy. Nancy Lou. It was something that tears your soul apart with a force that knocks the wind out of you. For anyone who knows something, this is the moment. There's no other. What do you make of what was said? And that reward they put on the table? And it's not just for her. There's also a fund for other families carrying that same unbearable emptiness, searching for answers that never come. It's devastating to watch, to listen to. It's like you can almost touch the raw pain they're going through right this minute. But $1 million offered by the family, that's unheard of. You can only hope that figure is the key to breaking the silence and solving this once and for all. With heavy sadness, she also accepted what everyone fears, that Nancy Guthrie may no longer be with us, that she may have finally gone to her eternal rest. But they need to find her. Now I'm passing the torch to you, because this case file can't sit gathering dust in the Pima offices any longer. It's now in your hands. A woman who vanished. A masked shadow who maybe rehearsed this horror twice before acting. A DNA sample that could be the key, or a complete letdown. A sheriff balancing on a tightrope between composure and a fatal mistake. And more than $1 million waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to talk. Think about this. If the evidence were ironclad, why measure your words so carefully? If the suspect felt cornered, would there be this kind of deafening silence? And if science can't give us a name, who will? Because somewhere someone knows exactly what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Someone noticed something out of place. Someone heard a noise and thought it was nothing important. They were wrong. Someone is holding on to a detail that seems insignificant until it isn't. Criminal history has taught us this over and over. Cases aren't always solved in a lab. They're solved by people. So I need you to do something. Drop your theory down below. Do you think the police are being brilliant, or are they just afraid to take a risk? Do you think that DNA is more revealing than they admit, or much weaker than they want us to believe? Pass this on to someone who lives to crack real mysteries. Because when the questions are screaming, the truth has a much harder time hiding. In a case held together by loose pieces and meticulously calculated phrases, sometimes the pressure from all of us is that final piece that ends up locking everything into the public eye.